The late afternoon sun cast golden hues over a quiet roadside diner, its neon sign flickering against the soft hum of passing traffic. Inside, the scent of sizzling burgers mixed with freshly brewed coffee, and the low murmur of conversations filled the air. It was the kind of place where locals gathered, where strangers passed through unnoticed. Until now. Near the counter, a young black girl sat alone in a corner booth, her wheelchair tucked beside her. She absent-mindedly stirred a milkshake, her fingers trembling slightly. The waitress had been kind, offering a smile as she served her meal, but most of the patrons hardly noticed her, except for two men sitting a few booths away. Hidden beneath baseball caps and casual hoodies, John Cena and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson enjoyed a quiet meal, their massive frames taking up much of the space. They weren't here to be recognized, they were here for some peace. But that peace wouldn't last long. The rumble of a motorcycle engine outside made a few heads turn. The diner door swung open, and in walked a tall, leather-clad biker with a smirk plastered across his face. His boots thudded against the tile floor as he scanned the room, his eyes locking onto the girl. John and Dwayne exchanged a glance. They didn't move. Not yet. But something in the air shifted. They could feel it. Trouble had just walked in. Before we get into today's story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's get started. The biker sauntered toward the girl's table, his heavy boots echoing against the linoleum floor. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his leather jacket adorned with skull patches and chains that clinked with every step. A cruel smirk curled at his lips as he loomed over her. "Well, well, what do we have here?" he sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "A little princess all by herself?" The girl flinched, but didn't respond. She kept her eyes down, gripping the straw of her milkshake with trembling fingers. "Hey, I'm talking to you," the biker said, slamming his gloved hand on the table, making her jump. The few patrons in the diner turned to look, but none of them spoke. The waitress froze behind the counter, her eyes darting between the biker and the girl. John Cena and The Rock remained seated, their eyes locked on the scene, their muscles tensed beneath their jackets. They didn't need to act yet, not until it was necessary. The biker chuckled darkly. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or is it the wheels that make you special?" He tapped the armrest of her wheelchair with an exaggerated nod. "Bet you ain't got nowhere to run, huh?" A few men sitting at the bar exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to interfere. The girl's breathing grew shallow, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. John adjusted his cap slightly, his fingers flexing around his coffee mug. Dwayne exhaled through his nose, slow and steady, but his jaw clenched. The biker reached for the milkshake in front of her, snatching it up. "Guess you won't mind if I take this then?" he taunted, before taking a long, exaggerated sip. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he tossed the half-full cup onto the floor, letting it splatter across the tiles. The girl gasped, her eyes welling up with tears. The Rock leaned forward ever so slightly, his massive forearms resting on the table. John set his mug down carefully, his gaze sharp. The biker wasn't finished. He leaned in closer, his tone turning darker. "People like you don't belong here. Just a burden, taking up space." That was the final straw. Dwayne slowly stood up. John followed, both men towering like immovable mountains. The diner fell into silence. The biker, oblivious to who he had just angered, merely scoffed. "You two got a problem?" he spat, eyeing them with a smirk. Or you just gonna sit there looking tough? John Cena rolled his shoulders, cracking his neck. Dwayne Johnson crossed his arms, his biceps bulging. The biker chuckled, taking a step closer, challenging them. Big mistake. John Cena took a slow step forward, his massive frame casting a long shadow over the biker. His voice was calm, steady, almost too relaxed for the situation. "You spill something, buddy?" he asked, nodding at the overturned milkshake. The biker scoffed, turning his head slightly to his crew, who had now started paying attention. There were 3 of them, leaning against their motorcycles just outside the diner, watching through the window. They smirked, already entertained by what they assumed was another clueless tough guy stepping in. "Yeah, I did," the biker said, crossing his arms. "And what? You gonna cry about it?" John didn't react. Instead, The Rock took a step beside him, his massive build just as imposing. He looked at the spilled drink, then at the biker. "Pick it up," Dwayne said, his voice deep and commanding. The biker let out a sharp laugh, glancing at his crew. "Oh, this is rich." He looked back at them, smirking. "And if I don't?" The tension in the diner was suffocating now. Every eye was on the scene. The waitress gripped her notepad, frozen mid-step. The old man in the corner put his coffee down, eyes wide. John sighed, cracking his knuckles. "I really don't think you want to find out." The biker took a step closer, now chest to chest with John Cena. He wasn't small, but compared to these 2 men, he might as well have been. Still, arrogance was blinding him. "You think you're tough? This ain't a movie, buddy," he spat, jabbing a finger into John's chest. "You don't know who you're messing with." The Rock exchanged a look with John. John smirked. "Funny, I was just about to say the same thing." The biker's face twitched in irritation, but before he could react, his crew pushed open the diner doors, stepping inside. 3 more bikers, each one meaner looking than the last. One of them, a bald, tattooed brute, snorted. "What's going on, Reggie? These guys giving you trouble?" Reggie, the original biker, grinned. "Nah, just a couple of idiots who think they can tell me what to do." Dwayne tilted his head, his gaze never leaving Reggie's. "Last chance. Pick up the milkshake." The bikers burst out laughing. One of them, a wiry guy with a snake tattoo on his neck, pointed at The Rock. "This guy serious?" Reggie grinned, stepping back, chest puffed out. "All right, big man, you want to play hero? Let's see what you got." The diner held its breath. The bikers cracked their knuckles. The girl in the wheelchair swallowed hard, gripping her armrests. John Cena exhaled through his nose. "All right," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "Your funeral." Reggie, the biker, smirked, rolling his shoulders as he took a step forward. He cracked his neck, then suddenly lunged at John Cena, swinging a wild punch aimed right at his face. But John didn't move, not at first. Then in a blur, he tilted his head slightly, the punch whiffing past his ear like a gust of wind. Reggie staggered forward, thrown off balance. John exhaled, almost disappointed. That was slow. Reggie growled and swung again, harder this time, but before his fist could reach its target, bam! John caught his wrist mid-air, gripping it like a steel vice. The biker's eyes widened in shock. His entire arm trembled under the sheer pressure of Cena's grip. "Uh-oh," one of the other bikers muttered. Before Reggie could react, John yanked him forward and, boom, slammed him face first into the diner counter. Plates rattled, silverware clattered. The entire diner gasped. Reggie groaned, stumbling backward, blood trickling from his nose. The Rock shook his head. Told you. But the other bikers weren't backing down. The bald brute with tattoos lunged at the Rock, pulling out a chain wrapped around his fist. Swinging it in a deadly arc, he aimed straight for Dwayne's head. Whoosh! But the Rock ducked effortlessly. The chain whooshed past his head, cracking the air. The biker pulled back to swing again. But the Rock was already moving. In a flash, he stepped in, snatching the biker's wrist mid-swing. With terrifying strength, he yanked the guy forward and boom! Spun him into a brutal rock bottom, slamming him onto the diner floor so hard the entire counter shook. The crowd gasped. A waitress covered her mouth. Someone's coffee cup slipped from their hands. Holy, a customer muttered. The biker groaned, dazed, sprawled out on the ground like a rag doll. The remaining two bikers exchanged nervous glances. Their fearless leader, Reggie, was wiping blood from his nose. The bald brute was out cold, and now they were staring at The Rock and John Cena, two human mountains who weren't even trying yet. Snake Tattoo, the wiry one, reached for something in his jacket. A knife. John's sharp eyes caught the move. Bad idea, he warned, but Snake Tattoo didn't listen. He lunged, blade flashing. John sidestepped with ease, then smack! Chopped Snake Tattoo's wrist so hard the knife flew into the air. The blade twirled mid-air, spinning in slow motion. Before it could hit the ground, The Rock snatched it out of the air. Shink! With a flick of his wrist, he snapped the blade in half like it was a toothpick. Snake Tattoo's eyes nearly popped out of his skull. John smirked. Still want to play? Snake Tattoo turned to run, but The Rock grabbed him by the collar. Oh no, you're staying, Dwayne muttered. Then, wham! He launched the guy straight through the diner doors, sending him crashing onto the pavement outside. Reggie, still dazed, saw all this happen in real time. His whole gang wrecked. He reached into his vest, pulling out a hidden gun. But before he could even aim, boom! John grabbed his wrist, twisted it at an impossible angle, and crack! The gun fell from Reggie's hand, clattering onto the floor. Reggie screamed in pain. John kicked the gun across the floor. Then he grabbed Reggie by the shirt, lifting him clean off his feet. Reggie's legs kicked in the air. His hands grasped desperately at John's iron grip. Cena leaned in close. I told you to walk away. Then, with terrifying ease, wham! He hoisted Reggie onto his shoulders and attitude. Adjustment slammed him straight onto the hard tile floor, rattling the entire diner. Reggie lay there, groaning, completely motionless. A silence fell over the room. Then, a slow clap. The little girl in the wheelchair. She smiled, tears in her eyes. One by one, the other customers joined in, clapping, cheering. The Rock adjusted his wristbands. Well, I think that went well. John exhaled, shaking his head. Idiots. The sirens of approaching police cars wailed in the distance. The fight was over. Justice was served. Reggie groaned, rolling onto his side, his body aching from the devastating attitude adjustment. His gang lay sprawled around the diner, some unconscious, others barely moving, all humiliated beyond belief. Snake Tattoo clutched his ribs, wincing in pain. The bald brute was still face down on the floor, completely out cold. One of the others tried to crawl toward the exit, but The Rock stepped in front of him, shaking his head. Dwayne muttered. You stay put. Reggie coughed, spitting blood onto the tile floor. He tried to push himself up, but barely had the strength. He looked up at John Cena, towering over him. Reggie's lip quivered. But please, man, I didn't know who you were. We were just messing around. John crouched down, leveling his gaze. Messing around? He glanced at the little girl in the wheelchair, then back at Reggie. You think terrorizing a kid is a joke? Reggie opened his mouth, but no words came out. You got two choices, John said, his voice deadly calm. Stay down and wait for the cops, or crawl out of here and pray you never see us again. Reggie's eyes darted toward the exit. He nodded frantically, scrambling to his feet, but just as he turned to run, wham! Dwayne caught him by the collar, stopping him in his tracks. Not so fast, tough guy, The Rock said. He turned Reggie to face the little girl. You owe her an apology. Reggie's face turned pale. He looked at the girl, whose big brown eyes stared at him, not with fear, but with quiet strength. Sorry, Reggie stammered, voice barely above a whisper. The girl tilted her head. Huh? Reggie swallowed hard. I'm sorry, he repeated louder this time. She nodded, unimpressed. The Rock smirked. Good boy. He patted Reggie's shoulder, then shoved him toward the exit. Reggie stumbled, nearly tripping over his own feet as he bolted through the door. His surviving gang members followed, dragging their unconscious friends along, scrambling to escape, just as the last one disappeared into the night. We owe! Red and blue lights flashed through the diner windows. The police had arrived. A pair of officers rushed inside, hands on their holsters, eyes scanning the scene. What the hell happened here? One of them muttered, taking in the wreckage, the overturned chairs, the shattered plates, the groaning bodies of bikers still too hurt to move. A diner patron pointed at The Rock and John Cena. Those two just saved that little girl's life. The officers turned, instantly recognizing them. John sighed. Before you ask, no, we didn't start this. The Rock nodded. But we sure as hell finished it. The officers looked at each other, then at the bikers groaning on the floor. Well, one cop muttered, smirking. Looks like justice was served before we even got here. As the police began cuffing the remaining gang members, the little girl wheeled herself toward John and The Rock. She looked up at them, her eyes shimmering. Thank you, she whispered. John knelt beside her, placing a massive hand on her shoulder. You don't ever let people like that scare you, okay? She nodded, smiling through her tears. Dwayne crouched next to her, holding up his fist. You're tougher than all of them combined. She giggled and bumped her tiny fist against his. As the officers hauled the last of the bikers away, the diner erupted in cheers. People clapped, whistled, some even recording. John stood, exhaling. Well, that was a hell of a meal. The Rock grinned. Next time, we pick a quieter diner. With one last nod to the little girl, they turned and walked out into the night. Justice had been served. Outside the diner, the cool night breeze rolled in, carrying the scent of rain on the horizon. John Cena and Dwayne, The Rock Johnson, stood near their parked cars, watching as the last of the police cruisers drove off, sirens fading into the distance. The little girl, Maya, wheeled herself to the doorway, her mother right behind her. She hesitated, then called out, Mr. Cena? Mr. Rock? Both men turned. Maya took a deep breath. I was really scared when they surrounded me. I thought no one would help. She looked down, gripping the arms of her wheelchair. But you did. John knelt in front of her, his expression serious but warm. Maya, I want you to remember something. There are a lot of tough people in this world. But the toughest ones? They're not the ones who throw punches. They're the ones who stand up for others, even when it's scary. Maya's eyes widened. The Rock crouched beside her, his massive hand resting lightly on her wheelchair. Courage isn't about muscles, kiddo. It's about heart. And from what I see, he tapped her chest gently. You've got plenty of that. Maya smiled. Really smiled this time. Not just a polite one, but a real, hopeful grin. Her mother wiped a tear from her eye. Thank you both, she said, voice trembling. I don't even know how to repay you. John shook his head. You don't have to. The Rock smirked. Just promise us one thing. When you see someone who needs help, don't look away. Maya nodded fiercely. I won't. John stood up, stretching his arms. Good. Then our job here is done. As they turned to leave, The Rock glanced back at the diner, at the people still watching them in awe. He exhaled. Then, turning toward the camera, the audience watching this story unfold, he spoke directly. This world isn't just made of heroes and villains. Most people stand in between, just watching, hoping someone else will step up. John crossed his arms, nodding. But real strength isn't about looking away. It's about doing the right thing when it counts. The Rock tilted his head. So the question is, what would you do? John pointed at the screen. If you saw someone being bullied, would you walk away? Or would you stand up, even if it wasn't easy? A beat of silence. Then, The Rock grinned. Drop your answers in the comments. John smirked. And if you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that like button. The Rock flexed his arm. And if you want more stories where justice always wins, John finished, make sure to subscribe, because this is just the beginning. With that, the two men gave Maya one last nod and walked off into the night, leaving behind a world just a little bit better than they found it.